Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today we're joined by John Ziegler, CEO of Acclaro, a consulting firm that delivers targeted insights for the investment sector. Acclaro helps middle market clients in the mergers and acquisition ecosystem focus on the right companies and helps management teams focus on the best options for growth post-close. In his role, John uses his experience in management consulting to drive Acclaro's strategic direction, focusing on the firm's continued transformation. Thanks for joining us on the show today, John.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, John, what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do what we do from a research perspective, which I think some mainline market research professionals would find to be a little bit off base. It's not 100% what you would consider to be by the book, but it's a research approach that works for us, works for our clients, and has been very repeatable and successful over the years, about 22 years that we've been in business.
Oh, nice. Congratulations. So can you tell us a bit about these 22 years before we get into this alternative approach you speak of?
So 22 years ago, our founder, Kit Lyle, wanted to start working with middle market CEOs and wanted to be sort of a strategic trusted advisor for them, and sort of tripped into working for the middle market or lower middle market of mergers and acquisitions, and did a lot of what we call buy-side commercial diligence, which is a private equity investor finds a target company that they've agreed to buy. We call that, the LOI stage, and then we would get hired to determine whether the thesis or what they think about that business is true. So that could be, I think this business is big, it's growing fast, it's in a great market, it has loyal customers, and so on and so forth. And we would go out into the market and determine whether those things are true or not. And if they're not, are they opportunities for the company to grow, after the transaction closes?
Cool. Okay, so with that in mind, thinking about this alternative approach, what exactly is it?
So our team full of senior researchers goes out into a market, and they'll pick up the phone, they'll call you, Michael, and say, Michael, this is John from Acclaro Growth Partners. I'd love to talk to you about the marketing space. We're doing some work around the company in widgets, for example, and I found your name on LinkedIn. It looks like your background is perfect for what we're trying to learn. I'd love to share with you what I know about the market and hear about what you're seeing. And that's how we would start. And then we have a list of objectives, or what I'll call questions loosely, but it's mainly objectives, where we're going to try to collect data points based on what we think your company knows about the market, or what your company knows about the target that we're investigating, or what your company knows about competitors to the target that we're investigating. And so it's really I call it a one-on-one focus group, or you could call it investigative journalism. It's a conversation. So it's not where our team has a list of questions and they say, I have 10 questions I need to ask you, I need to get answers to them, and when I'm done, we'll move on. It's a relationship building exercise where we're trying to collect data and insights. And it's a lot more art than it is science. Some people are really good at building those relationships pretty quickly with somebody. For other people, it's a little bit harder. But that's high level how we go about doing what we do. A lot of the time we call it applying quantitative rigor to qualitative data. So we're collecting data points. We're trying to figure out how big companies are, trying to figure out how big markets are. We're trying to determine how loyal customers are to their providers. So we're trying to collect those data points. In many cases, it's a qualitative descriptor for those data points. So really, our engagement directors are asking questions of our research team, and then they're answering them in the documents that we create for them. So it's really us asking our internal team, what's the answer to this? you interpret what you heard from your interview and then put it into our form that we create. So it's a lot of art. There's a lot of back and forth internally. So what exactly did they say for you to give them this rating for this particular question, whether it's net promoter score, or whether it's loyalty, or whether it's how likely are you to switch, or those types of questions. We're applying a score to each of these things. Sometimes it's numeric, sometimes it's qualitative, but that's based on what our research team interprets from what they're getting from the person that they're interviewing.
So that's certainly is a unique approach. How do you find these respondents? I guess it might seem a little bit of a challenge.
It's it's a grind.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing we ask our clients when we start an engagement is, can you provide a list of customers? Can you give us an idea, give us who your top competitors are, right? We never ask, they're not going to have, name, phone number, email address for competitors, but they will for their customers. And knowing that we're not going to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, by the way, our client is XYZ and we're investigating a transaction. We never do that. But that's the starting point. Some cases we don't get those lists. Some cases we get fantastic lists, and it's our job to sort of navigate through that. So we use LinkedIn, we use Zoom Info, we use other proprietary databases we have access to. We use our own networks. In some cases, we'll pick up the phone and call into a company looking for somebody in marketing. And knowing full well that person's probably not the right contact, but that person may be able to refer us to who we really need to talk to. So sometimes it's just it's a dialing for dollars exercise until you get to the right person. And sometimes you have the right person right away and you can get them on the phone. But that's one of the hardest parts of what we do. There's a lot of companies out there now that do a lot of appointment setting for you. And in some cases, those are worth it for how we do what we do, being able to tell somebody we got to you through, a referral from somebody, or I saw you on LinkedIn, or you're in my network. Those are the things that help open the door for us to have a conversation.
Mm. So you mentioned before you don't have incentives for this approach, and I'm aware that the interviews can be lengthy. How do you strike that balance?
Well, let's go with the first part. We don't provide incentives. That makes it extremely hard, but also makes it extremely valuable. So if somebody is not getting paid to participate and have a conversation with one of our analysts, they're not preparing any sort of pre-canned responses to anything. So they're going to be a little more open. They're going to be a little more honest. And that's what we want. Like our clients are expecting unfiltered, unbiased responses, because our job is to help them reduce risk in their transactions. So that's the first part. The second part is sometimes they are lengthy, and the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. As far as we can go, as deep as we can go with a conversation, the better. There are times where our interviews, they might be 3 minutes long, but we got one data point that we're looking for, and that's fantastic. In other cases, they're an hour and 3 minutes long, and it just takes a long time to filter through or really separate the wheat from the chaff to get to what we really need out of that interview. But the more we have, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and
I'll add that too. Like our engagement director's job is to filter through all of that, and so before we even start, we're already preparing what our final story is going to look like from a storyboarding perspective, and so their job is to really pick through all of that. And so what I call is sort of post interview. So our engagement directors are then picking up the phone and saying, okay, Michael, you did this interview a week ago. I really need to understand what they meant by this quote, or what they meant by this number, or what they meant by, this particular competitor is much better at this particular service area. What exactly did they mean? Can you peel away the onion for me a little bit? so that I can understand how to interpret that and build that into the analysis. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of follow-up interviews. The last thing we ask someone before we get off the phone with them is, do you mind if I follow up with you if I have a question about something that we talked about? And that's pretty standard. Sometimes these interviews take the form of 2 or 3 discussions, not just one.
Yeah, okay. So I guess more value comes with each subsequent callback as well.
Sometimes what if you think about the progression of research, right? You start with your first couple interviews and you learn a little bit more. And as you go, you learn a little bit more and you realize, oh, what I asked in the first interview probably wasn't the right way to ask it. And maybe I should go back and re-ask it. And as you get to the end, you really understand more about what was being said from the first, third, and middle third of the timeline of the research. So it's an accretive knowledge base that we're building that we sometimes have to follow back up and circle back to make sure we really understand what we heard.
Yeah, for sure. So after you've collected all this data, what's the next step? It's not like a typical survey anywhere where the same questions are asked. I imagine building the insights is definitely part of that art you spoke of.
So I don't always, but most of the time I tell clients, we're narrative tellers, we're narrative builders. So a client will come to us on our buy side work that we do and say, I want to buy this company. I have them under LOI. I have 30 days to finalize the deal. And we'll ask them, well, what's your thesis? What do you think you know? What excites you and what scares you? And we'll go out to figure out whether those things are true or not. Then what we do is we take all of those insights, all those interviews, we augment that with labor statistic data or economic data or some third-party reports if we believe the data that's in them, and we build a report. And the report is, in my view, it's a narrative. We're telling the story of this company from the lens of our client. Is it actually run by a really good management team? Are the relationships sticky? Is it growing in the channels you think it's growing in? So we're putting together a 100-page, 7,500-page research report or analysis of that company based on what that set of thesis points was.
Yeah, cool. So I guess you tend to work on both sides of the transaction as well. Then there's a little bit of the buying and the selling. How does your story differ between the two?
Sure. It's a good question. And I failed to mention this when we talked about what Acclaro is, so I apologize. But
sure.
we're really three service areas, right? You think of the life cycle of a business. A business gets started, and eventually the owner wants to sell it. So that's the buy side part where somebody comes in and is going to buy the business, and I've talked about that a lot. Then once they own it, they want to grow it. So at some point they can sell it. So during that growth period, we call that growth consulting, value creation. You call a lot of different things, and that can take the form of a lot of different objectives. And then the third is sell side market studies. So an investment bank is helping a company put their business on the market to be sold. And this is a newer phenomenon, probably the last 5, 10, 15 years, where companies, before they have a buyer, they go out and they get a third party to build a market study on their business. So from the lens of what that business is. So, what's the business? Who are the competitors? What's the market that they're in? Is the market growing? Are there other opportunities ancillary to that market? So that's the sell side portion of our business. So I mentioned the thesis points from the buy side. There's a buyer that has all these things that they think are great about this company. On the sell side, there's a seller that thinks all these things are great about their company, and they have an advisor, an investment bank that says, here's how we're going to position you to the market. Our job is to say, okay, well, whatever the positioning is that you want to tell to the market, we'll go out and try to determine whether those things are true or not. And the ones that are true, we will tell a positive narrative about that has a lot of facts to support it. the things that maybe aren't true or maybe are potentially negative, we'll position those as opportunities. So you'll hear me use the analogy all the time of you have two people. I'll use a baseball analogy. Hopefully most of the listeners are baseball fans, and if not, I can explain it in more detail. But if you have two people running down first, if you have two people run down to first base and they both get there at the same time, and one has perfect form and one has terrible form, investors want the guy with terrible form, because if they teach him any form at all, he's going to be faster than the guy with good form. So our job then, from a negative or opportunity perspective, say, look, they're not doing this really well, but if they did do it well, this is the opportunity that they have, and this is what it would do to their ability to steal share, their ability to grow, their ability to go into other markets. So a lot of what we're doing is telling the narrative from a fact-based positive perspective, and the things that aren't positive, we have to figure out how those things can be turned into opportunities. And the things that aren't opportunities, we identify them, but we just don't talk about them a lot, because that's the investment bank and the seller will talk about that when they get to that part of their deal process. But so we're thinking of the same approach. You have this list of things. One's a list of hypotheses about a business, and one's a list of your thesis about buying the business. And we're really going about it the same way. We're just looking at it from a different lens.
So I'm assuming you'd actually want to have that sell conversation quite early on in your engagement, but then focus a good chunk of time in growth, so building it up to be in a really good position to sell.
The growth part of it is the aggregation of everything else we do. So if we're talking to customers, channel partners, distribution, e-commerce, it depends on the market. We're talking to all the people that participate in those things in a market, or in the lens of that particular company. The underlying piece to all of that is, how do you take those things and turn them into growth opportunities? So the growth section is always the last one, and because we have to tell the story about all the other things that are happening, all the other things that are driving growth or that are inhibiting growth, all the things that are driving brand value, the things that are driving financial value, and then how do you then identify the underlying growth opportunities based on all of those other pieces that you now understand from a functional business perspective.
No, for sure. So do you have any success stories on from both a buying and a seller perspective?
There's lots of let's start on the buy side. I'll just talk generally without talking about particular deals or markets, but we had a client that was looking at a deal that the first week in our mind was, there's no chance that this is a good business to look at. And then we started identifying other channels that their competitors were going after, because the market was receding. And so we pivoted and started looking at those channels instead, and those ancillary markets instead. And so our client was able to then get a little bit lower multiple for the business, because the quote unquote business that they were selling was not the business that they were getting, knowing, underlying that there's other opportunities that are pretty immense, that post close they'd have to put a little more money into it, but because they're saving on the multiple, they'd be able to inject that capital into it and grow it. And if I remember right, they quadrupled the size of the business in like 2 years and then flipped it around. So that's a success story on the buy side. On the sell side, we've had several clients. A success story for us is, you have a founder-owned business, $150-200 million business. You've got a guy that's run it for 40 years, knows everything about the business, but has never engaged in this type of study. And his advisor says, I want you to meet these guys from Acclaro. They're going to do this study for you for a big price ticket, price, right? And He says, absolutely not. I know everything about my business. There's no reason someone else should go in and do it for me. And it's a pretty big investment for them. It's the first time they've done that. A success story for us is when we can go in and we can convince them and explain to them that this isn't just about the transaction. This is about the people that work for you that are going to be working at this company after you sell it. This is going to give them the opportunity to succeed post-close. This is going to give buyers the opportunity to understand what your business really is. This is going to give you the ability to get a better multiple. It's going to give your advisor the ability to get you to the closing table faster. When we're able to convince them that this is a good idea, that there's value in it besides just throwing a report in a data room, it's a really good relationship that we're building. And I can think of 3 or 4 instances where we've done that, and now we're their advisor of choice when they look at strategic growth opportunities as a corporate client, which has nothing to do with the M&A world that we participate in. So when that happens, that's a really big win for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one of the whole points about market research, isn't it? Your growing understanding. So the understanding is the one part, but disseminating that and sharing it with stakeholders and with other people that can make use of it is equally important.
And for us, it's important. Because we do the work the way we do it, we have touch points all the time with our clients, and we want them pushing back and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. Did you ask this? Or it doesn't make any sense. Who did you talk to? It doesn't make any sense. What's the product or service you were talking about? So that interaction makes us more of a partner down the hall than it does just some guy picking up the phone and conducting interviews. And that's the part I think that separates us a little bit from the rest of our market.
So would you say that's a good approach for really trying to tackle bias? Because there's a lot of assumptions that we hold just in our own businesses. Our customers do this, this, and this. We've asked them plenty of times, but
yeah. Well, I mean, anytime you ask a customer what they think about a provider, and if they're more likely to say, at the worst case, neutral. They're going to give you a neutral response. That's the worst case. Best case is they're going to tell you how wonderful you are, even if that's not true. The same thing for when you ask somebody what's most important in their buying decision. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say price. But if you can get them to talk about things that have nothing to do with price, and you can get them to talk about companies or service providers in a way that's not just about one service provider, it's about all of them relative against each other, you're going to get much more, I'll call it much more valuable, much more accurate feedback.
Yeah, for sure. So really appreciate your perspectives and that art side of things that you've shared now. Anything you'd like to add to help summarize our discussion today?
I would just say that there's a lot of different ways to do this, and depending on what your objective is at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily mean that the way we do it is perfect or is right, but for what we do, it's been the best, most consistent way to go about doing what we do. But there's times where we do things for corporate clients where we don't have to do things this way, and we can do them in a little different way. So I always think that keep an open mind about what's the best solution for the particular situation is the best way to look at how to go about collecting insights, versus just saying this is my way and I do it every time, and you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's very true. And look, it's really encouraging just to see the breadth of methodologies and approaches, etc., out there. So really good to see people trying different things. And I mean, there's a huge data quality issue challenge that the whole industry is facing. And as we were saying earlier before the episode, that just the way that you've been doing things isn't necessarily the way that it's going to work in the future. So being open to different things, new ways, whether it's process, technology, or people, you're only going to do right by your business and your shareholders, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, you are 100% spot on about data quality. And you have to be open-minded to maybe we got it wrong at times. And how did we get it wrong and how can we fix it is more important than, well, crap, we got it wrong. It's the response to it that's more important from our perspective. And that goes for all the types of data collection we do. This is just what I call our nucleus, but the way we do surveys is different than we've ever done in the past. The way we do focus groups is different than we've ever done it in the past. So there's an ever-changing market, and there's an evolution to how quickly information is available. And I'm guessing AI is going to have a big impact on a lot of this moving forward if it hasn't already. So maybe we do this conversation again in a year, it'll be completely different. I'm not sure.
That's right. I mean, there's always bright, shiny tech objects that come along that promise to do lots of stuff. Chatbots have been in and around the business world for 10 to 15 years now, and they're only just at a place where they're believable. So, I mean, the quality underlying them is can be a bit iffy, but it shows you it's worth keeping an eye on it. But keeping those fundamentals right is still really important too.
We use our Americanisms, or basic blocking and tackling is important, and those shiny objects are just distractions. But I apologize to the listeners for all the American analogies, but that's all I got.
Hoorah! Nice. So thank you so much for sharing all of this today, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. For the listeners out there, thank you too for listening in as well. We hope you have liked what you've heard today and had your interest piqued about some of the processes in that John and Acclaro do. If you have liked what you've listened to, please subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with others, and even leave a review on whichever platform that you've listened to us on. Until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.